On asylum policy, albeit given rocket boosters by Chancellor Merkel, has been a dramatic failure.
First of all is about competitiveness. When I look at the single market of 500 million people, I think it is
decades of discards on a truly horrendous scale. And whilst I and everybody else wants a proper, sustainable...
That's what the concern is about. It's not a concern about race or colour or creed.
...replaced by a puppet Prime Minister. We saw exactly the same thing happen in Greece in 2011. Mr Papandreou threatened a referendum. Poverty. I'm sorry, we simply can't accept countless millions. Already in countries like mine.
Everyone is talking about here in Davos, but we're going to continue to deliver the strong and resilient economy that we were elected to deliver. And it's good to be back in Davos with a new political mandate. We held an election, and I have a mandate of a Conservative-only government, a majority government, with a mandate to complete the job that we set out in terms of our economy, a mandate to deliver security for the people who elected us and for the British people as a whole, but also, crucially, a mandate to deliver reform in Europe and to put the question of Britain's place in Europe and answer that question comprehensively during this Parliament. And that's what I want to speak about today, before trying to answer your questions. And I want to be absolutely clear about the aim that I want us to achieve. I want to be clear about what needs to change in order to make that happen. And I want to be clear about the debate that I think we need to have, including business and non-governmental organizations and others who care about this issue. So let me start with the aim. My aim is absolutely clear. I want to secure the future of Britain in a reformed European Union. I believe that is the best outcome for Britain and the best outcome for Europe. Now, some people ask me, well, why are you holding a referendum? And let me explain why I believe this referendum is so crucial. For years, Britain has been drifting away from the European Union. The European Union has become increasingly unpopular in Britain. And added to that, a succession of politicians, after treaty after treaty after treaty has passed, have promised referendums, but never actually delivered them.
And I think it's European summit and yet another power grab. It's funny, every single time a European Union policy fails, and that's pretty often, the demand is more centralisation and more Europe. And I think by any measure, the EU's common asylum policy, albeit given rocket boosters by Chancellor Merkel, has been a dramatic failure. Not only will millions continue to come, few of whom, of course, would qualify as genuine refugees, but it's become an open invitation to terrorism. So our solution is that the EU Border Agency and the EU Maritime Services should be given powers and the ability to declare force majeure over the member states. And incredibly, the British Prime Minister, David Cameron, is supporting this. And yet, that's the same Prime Minister who is going in to have a meeting with you tomorrow night to talk about our so-called renegotiation. I hope he fares better than last time. The last time he attempted this, he got to speak at 1 o'clock in the morning, spoke for a total of 7 minutes, during the middle of which the French President, Monsieur Hollande, got up and went out for a pee. So I hope they take him a bit more seriously this time, though I sense that nobody in this room is exactly quaking in their boots. After all, he has asked for almost nothing and is unlikely to even get that. But I'm sure we'll be treated to the usual theatricals. A grave-faced Prime Minister will come back to Britain to say how tough the negotiations have been, to say that he will not give in, and there'll be hints that perhaps the Prime Minister will even support Brexit if he doesn't get his way. I think we should take that about as seriously as when he banged the table and said he would not pay the 1.75 billion sterling surcharge 18 months ago, and yet then meekly obliged. In February, the charade will come back. There'll be a European summit, and on something minor and inconsequential, there'll be a deal, and a referendum will happen in June 2016. Opposition to this project is growing. We also need the referendum
in order to address the concerns that people have in Britain about Europe. The idea that there is too much rulemaking and bureaucracy. The idea that this could become too much of a single currency only club. The idea that Europe is really about a political union that Britain has never been comfortable with. So I believe holding the referendum, answering these questions, but with the end goal of securing Britain's place in a reformed European Union can give Britain and can give Europe the best of both worlds. Now let me explain what it is that I think needs to change. And I've set out the four things, the four areas that I think are so crucial. I just want to run through them. First of all is about competitiveness. When I look at the single market of 500 million people, I think it is an absolutely thrilling prospect. This is a quarter of the global economy. But we have to be frank, when we look at Europe's single market, we're still lagging behind America in technology, we're lagging behind in productivity. We could be doing so much more to add to the competitiveness of our businesses and our economies rather than taking away from it. And that's why what I want to see, and what I believe we will see, is clear measures to cut the bureaucracy that there is in Europe and to cut the rulemaking. I want to see clear measures to complete the single market in digital, in services, in energy, which would be of huge benefit to countries like Britain, but right across Europe in terms of jobs and prosperity. And crucially, I want to see Europe sign trade deals with the fastest growing parts of the world. For instance, our trade deal with Korea has been fantastically successful for Korea, but even more successful actually for the countries of the European Union. And people will want to know in Britain that the European Union is signing trade deals as fast and more significant than we could ever sign on our own. So I want to hardwire competitiveness into the European Union so it benefits countries, not just Britain, but I think it will benefit all of Europe. And that's why I think it's important that we put this on the table. Now, the second area I want to see change is I want to make sure that this organization is good for those countries that are members of the Eurozone, but also good for those countries like Britain that don't want to join the Euro. Because the truth is this, for many, many years, in Britain's case, I suspect forever, the European Union is going to have more than one currency. And we should be frank about that. And let me be clear, I want the Eurozone to succeed. The Eurozone is our biggest trading partner. I don't want to stand in the way of things that need to be done to make the Eurozone a success. Indeed, I would encourage Eurozone members to take those necessary steps. But in a sentence, what we need is an organization that is flexible enough so that you can be a success if you're not in the Euro or a success if you are in the Euro, and fair rules between the two. Let me give you just one example of what I mean. During last summer...
Perhaps we should ask ourselves what really is the true nature of this project, because I've heard a lot today about rights. Well, what about democratic rights? Because I think what we're seeing is an increasingly authoritarian European Union that crushes democratic rights and then actually crows about it. Every single time there's a crisis, it's national democracy that loses. We saw back in 2011 the Italian Prime Minister Berlusconi, sounding Eurosceptic, removed and replaced by a puppet Prime Minister. We saw exactly the same thing happen in Greece in 2011. Mr Papandreou threatened a referendum on Euro membership. There was a coup against him. He was replaced by a puppet. In this migrant crisis, we've seen 4 countries, led, I guess, by the strongest, Hungary, making it clear they want no part of EU migrant quotas, only to find themselves crushed through EU trickery and made to accept the very thing that they'd said no to. And I'll never forget seeing the Greek Prime Minister, Mr Tsipras, sitting just over there, having won a general election, and then come to this House to be told the manifesto was unacceptable and it must be ditched. But I think all of this has reached a new low this week with Portugal, virtually unremarked upon by the media, and yet for those that don't know, there is now, following the general election, a left-wing majority with a socialist plan for Portugal, and yet the President of Portugal, Mr Silva, is refusing them office on the grounds that they represent anti-European forces and is allowing the minority Conservative pro-EU Prime Minister to stay in place. This is the modern-day implementation of the Brezhnev doctrine. This is exactly what happened to states living inside the USSR. What has been made clear here with Greece and indeed with Portugal is that a country only has democratic rights if it's in favour of the project. If not, those rights are taken away. And perhaps none of this should surprise us. As Mr Juncker has told us before, there can be no democratic choice against the European treaties. And the German finance minister, Mr Schäuble, has said elections change nothing. There are rules. I think for anyone that believes in democracy, Portugal should be the final straw. It should be the warning that this project, to protect itself and all its failings, will destroy the individual rights of people and of nations. My country has always believed in parliamentary democracy so strongly that twice in the last century it risked everything to fight for parliamentary democracy, not just for Britain, but for the rest of Europe too. And I actually believe that for all of us that believe in democracy and want to see it re-implemented, the British referendum offers a golden opportunity.
Discriminated against, and there's proper fairness between the systems. Now, I think that is achievable. And again, I think that would be good for Britain, but I also think it would be good for all the countries of the European Union, whether they're in the Eurozone or not. Now, the third area we need, I think, to see change for Britain, but again, I would argue, good change for Europe, and that is in the area of sovereignty. Britain has never been happy with the idea that we're part of an ever closer political union. We're a proud and independent country with proud, independent, democratic institutions that have served us well. We're also together on foreign policy challenges to make sure we take robust action. It was Britain that led the charge on sanctions against Russia because of its actions in Ukraine. It was Britain that led the charge on making sure we had those crucial sanctions against Iran that helped to bring Iran to the table that's brought about that non-nuclear deal. So we're not reluctant in that sense. But if Europe is about an ever-deepening political union with ever-deepening political institutions, then it's not the organization for us. So I want to be absolutely clear that we want to carve Britain out of the idea of ever closer union. We will be enthusiasts for the economic cooperation, for foreign policy cooperation, for working together on challenges like climate change, but we're never going to be comfortable in something that insists that Britain should be part of an ever closer union. We're not comfortable with that, and we need to sort that out. And the fourth and final area is perhaps the most difficult of all, and that is this issue of migration and welfare. Now, Britain is, I would argue, one of the most successful multiracial, multi-faith, multi-ethnic democracies anywhere on earth. We are a very diverse nation, a very diverse and successful nation. But the pressures that we faced from migration in recent years have been too great. Our population is growing anyway, even before this migration is taken into account. But the figures are simple. Today, net migration into Britain is running at 330,000 a year. That means adding as many as sort of 3.5 million people to our population across a decade. And that's what the concern is about. It's not a concern about race or color or creed. It is a concern about numbers and pressure. And it's the British people's number one concern. And I don't think for 1 minute they're being unreasonable having this concern. Indeed, I share this concern because the pressure on public services, the pressure on communities has been too great. Now, of course, we need to do more to control migration from outside the European Union, and we're doing that. But we do need to look at the situation within the European Union. Now, I want to be clear. I support the idea of free movement. Many British people take advantage of free movement to go and live and work in other European countries. But I think where this has gone wrong is that the interaction of our welfare system with free movement has actually set up very large pressures on our country. And that is what needs to change. And that's why I put on the table the idea, the proposal, that you should have to live or work in Britain for 4 years before you get full access to our in-work benefit system. Because the way it works today, because Britain has a non-contributory system, one you can access straight away, that you could train as a nurse in Bulgaria, and actually it would pay you to come and work in manual labor in Britain because of our top-up welfare system. And in the end, that isn't really right for Bulgaria, and that isn't really right for Britain. And I think when enthusiasts for the European Union look at this issue, they should stand back and look at the facts and the figures. When the founding fathers of Europe came together, did they ever really believe that 1 million people were going to move from Poland?
It's unlikely to even get that. But I'm sure we'll be treated to the usual theatricals. A grave-faced Prime Minister will come back to Britain to say how tough the negotiations have been, to say that he will not give in, and there'll be hints that perhaps the Prime Minister will even support Brexit if he doesn't get his way. I think we should take that about as seriously as when he banged the table and said he would not pay the 1.75 billion sterling surcharge 18 months ago, and yet then meekly obliged. In February, the charade will come back. There'll be a European summit, and on something minor and inconsequential, there'll be a deal, and a referendum will happen in June 2016. Opposition to this project is growing right across the continent. 15% now of the Hungarian population have signed a petition against migrant quotas. We saw an extraordinary advance in the French National Front in the elections in France last week, but so far nobody has reached the tipping point. Well, the British referendum may be that moment, and the momentum is on our side. It isn't just about getting back national democracy, it's actually about getting back national self-confidence. And I think for those of us that believe in nation-state democracy, 2016 is a very
would make
bright
their home
dawn
in Britain. Now, those people make an incredible contribution to our economy, and I welcome that, but the scale of the movement, the scale of the pressure, is something that we need to address. And I think when in Europe we look at the issues we face today, whether it's the migration crisis, whether it is the issues that Britain's putting on the table, it would be far better to address these issues, to try and solve these problems, rather than try and look our electorates in the eye and say we're simply not going to listen to what you're doing. So what I've tried to set out is 4 things, not outrageous asks that can't be achieved, but 4 practical sets of steps that, if achieved, would actually answer the concerns that Britain has about Europe. Now, let me just say a last couple of words on the debate I think that we need to have on the timing of how this should work and what I believe the end point of all this should be. Now, in terms of the timing, I very much hope that we can, with the goodwill that is clearly there, reach an agreement at the February European Council. I would like that. I want to confront this issue. I want to deal with it. I want to put that question to the British people in a referendum and go out and campaign to keep Britain in a reformed European Union. If there's a good deal on the table, I will take it, and that's what will happen. But I do want to be very clear. If there isn't the right deal, I'm not in a hurry. I can hold my referendum at any time up until the end of 2017. And it's much more important to get this right than to rush it. But of course, I think it would be good for Europe and good for Britain if we demonstrated that we can turn the goodwill that there is into the actions that are necessary to put this question beyond doubt and get the answer from the British people. Now, in terms of the debate, I think we need to have. Obviously, the politicians are going to play a big role in this debate, and I hope to play a big role myself. But I hope that business and NGOs and other organizations won't hold back. And I would say don't hold back right now. Even though the question isn't settled, I think that if business backs my reforms, if you want to see the competitive Europe, if you want to see the flexible Europe, if you want to see a Europe where you can be in the Eurozone and win, or out of the Eurozone and win, I would argue get out there and support those things. I think it's important that with this, which is such a massively important generational question for Britain and for Europe, the sooner you can start to look at your own businesses and come up with the examples and the ideas about the benefits and the problems that there are with Europe, the more that you are able to help to explain and set the context for this vitally important question for Britain and for Europe. Now, where do I hope this all ends? Well, let me just say this. Even if I'm successful in getting this reform package and holding this referendum, and Britain decides to stay in a reformed Europe, at no stage will you hear me say, well, that is perfection. This organization is now fixed. There are many things that are imperfect about the European Union today, and there'll be many things that will be imperfect about the European Union even after this negotiation. We do need reform in Europe to make sure Europe works for the countries of Europe, for the peoples of Europe, for the businesses of Europe, for all that people who want to work and have security and get on and make something of their lives. The reform will not be finished. Second thing I'd say about the end of all this is you're never going to hear me say that Britain couldn't succeed outside the European Union. Britain is the 5th largest economy in the world. We've got a huge amount of talent and resources and brilliant people, and we're members of many important...
If the British people was going to share its views on the EU and, your views on the EU and your views on Cameron, how come UKIP hasn't got more than one seat in Westminster?
Mr. Lucke, as you may or may not understand, we have a very odd electoral system in the United Kingdom, but I would remind you, in the European elections, UKIP won those elections. And right across the continent, we are seeing the centre, the left and the right, genuine opposition to the European project growing. The disappointment, Mr. Lucke, is that people like you in Germany, who've been critical of so many aspects of the Union, of so much about the euro, appear not to have the courage to logically follow through your own convictions and to conclude that this project is the wrong project, and what we want is a Europe of democratic nation states trading together, being friends together, but without the flag, without the anthem, without the Commission and without the European Parliament.
Every single Fisheries Committee meeting for all the years I've been in this Parliament. I'm not a member anymore. But even if I had, there's nothing I could have done to help up to 800,000 people from our country who go out and target bass for their leisure activity. They provide jobs in coastal communities. They provide jobs in tackle shops and tackle manufacture. They provide, in many cases, the real important backdrop for harbours and coastal communities. And this ban was brought in without being debated in the Fisheries Committee. So not much point going there. Without being debated or voted on in this Parliament, it was done by a regulation put forward by a Maltese bureaucrat we can't vote for and we can't remove. What I want, Mr Corbett, is us to have a proper, functioning democracy, and then we can discuss how we manage UK stocks. Nice try, bad luck, old son.
I know that some other countries have difficulties with it. I've said that if there are alternatives people can come up with that are equally potent and powerful and important, I'm prepared to look at them. But we do need action on this front if we're going to get the reform that Britain needs, that Europe needs, and bring this question successfully to a conclusion. Can I thank you very much? Can I say, sorry, that was all a speech about Europe, and I didn't get into the fourth industrial revolution, vital though that is, but I thought this was an important audience to talk about this vital subject, crucial to Britain's future, crucial to Europe's future, crucial, I think, to many businesses' future, and I would encourage you to get out there, to join the debate, and to talk about this vital issue so that we get it right. Thank you very much indeed.
The same Prime Minister who is going in to have a meeting with you tomorrow night to talk about our so-called renegotiation. I hope he fares better than last time. The last time he attempted this, he got to speak at 1 o'clock in the morning, spoke for a total of 7 minutes, during the middle of which the French President, Monsieur Hollande, got up and went out for a pee. So I hope they take him a bit more seriously this time.